Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. We've got Matt Offenbacher here as always. Matt, I was thinking about you the other day when I saw a post saying that Altuve is heading into the outfield. Tell us more. What's up with that?
Well, so if you look at the infield of the Astros' performance last year, it was not good. I can't remember. It was like a negative 17 differential on what is called like defensive runs saved, which basically means they had the yips and they were not stopping runners from advancing that they could have and that sort of thing. And Altuve is sort of an aging star. His defensive numbers haven't been great. And in fact, since they eliminated the shift, have gotten worse. And I mean, that's part of natural decline. Second base is a pretty demanding position. And so, originally there was sort of this noise of, he might go to left field, with the whole idea that if they were able to re-sign Alex Bregman, they could move Isaac Paredes to second, and we could bring Bregman back, and everyone would have a spot.
Right.
So, but then it became more and more. He's like, dude, I'll do whatever, And so in all of spring training, they've had him working in left field, and they've said, look, he'll probably do that a fair amount. He'll probably do some second base as well, but we'll mix it up based upon the analytics. And this is sort of an important piece of managing, aging talent. Of course I want Altuve for life as an Astro, right? I don't want to see him in another uniform.
Yeah.
But the hard part about that is as these guys decline, you've got to manage their workload. You've got to, in some areas, they're not who they were as they age, and so you've got to sort of work around all that stuff.
How old is Altuve? Do you know, roughly?
33? I could
He's
be
in his 30s, though?
wrong. Yeah, he's in his 30s. So, his 5-year deal or whatever he signed, I think the assumption is that's going to be the last contract of his career.
Dang, that's crazy. I mean, he's obviously got the skill set and the speed to cover a lot of ground in the outfield, so that's cool.
Left field's not that big. It's typically where you put somebody like that. The ball doesn't go to left field very often, and so it's not necessarily the most demanding position. It's not like right or center.
See, that surprises me because most batters are right-handed, and naturally I would expect them to hit it into left field, but statistically speaking, it's more center or right field?
No, it's going to be more right field, or right center. And but this is the whole deal, is why a bunch of players have, even if they throw right, bat left. So Yordan Alvarez bats left. He's a right-handed thrower.
Yeah, it's like my kids.
But they want them to alternate, right? So that you can't have a pitcher, left-handed pitchers don't have this huge advantage against right-handed pitchers and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is just, there are these guys that they're called, pull hitters, which means they hit opposites. So they're gonna hit into left field. So Isaac Paredes and Christian Walker, our first baseman that we signed, are both known as pull hitters. And what does that mean? Well, you have a very shallow left field, and they tend to hit most of their home runs into left field.
No way.
So hopefully at Daikin, they'll be able to, they'll be very successful.
Right.
So,
and that was another thing. So what happened to Minute Maid?
Well,
The end of the contract?
Daikin, I bought out the rights.
What?
So, I mean, normally these things are like a 20-year deal or what have you, and sometimes there's you can sell it if you want to, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, Daikin jumped in, and
what is Daikin, or who's
they
Daikin?
do air conditioning.
What?
They're huge manufacturer of. They got a lot of air conditioning unit brands. We'll probably learn more about it as we go to the ballpark this summer.
Yeah.
But my only hope is that if they want to represent their brand well, the air conditioning in the ballpark is considerably better.
Right. You'd expect it to be top notch. The perfect temperature in there all the time.
Exactly. And it wasn't great last year, especially when you're trying to get kids out of the summer heat or whatever.
Well,
Um,
I
you
feel
know,
like Minute Maid had a strategy there where if they kept it warm enough, then kids would drink more orange juice.
mm,
I don't know.
look, I mean, analytics don't lie, right? So,
Did Minute Maid sell orange juice?
I don't know if they did, it used to, I don't know if they're still owned by Coca-Cola, but like, anyway, that's a whole other story altogether, but
Now we're
you'd think it would be everywhere.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, as much as I'd like to keep talking about Astros, folks, we are here to talk about drilling fluids. But it's always kind of nice to get the update from Matt on the Astros. We'll be in full season here shortly, so buckle up. It's going to be a good ride, and depending on their record, you may or may not get the Why Matt Hates series. Because if they're losing, Matt typically likes to do the Why Matt Hates series to kind of get things off his chest. But today, Matt, it's you, you know we did an episode about how low can you go. And it wasn't about the dance, but rather how low in density can you get your drilling fluids mathematically, theoretically. There's always things that come into play. And then naturally, it was like, well, if we go into the opposite end of the spectrum, how heavy can you get a mud without it just basically locking up and being like a solid system, which obviously then that wouldn't work. But how heavy can you go, Matt? What do you think? Should we talk about that?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, of course, like all these episodes, it depends, right? So I think we run through some of the factors, and then I might throw a few numbers out there.
Perfect. So when we're talking about high density drilling fluids, I think it's important to recognize that there's a solids sort of way of going about density, and then there's a solids free way about going. And so, there's different density sources. And so talk a little bit about like how come there's two, and then we'll go from there.
Well, in the world of completions, a lot of times we'll use clear fluids, and we've done some episodes on how, what densities you can achieve with these exotic brines and that sort of thing. But from a circulating pressure perspective, they're fabulous, right? They're just really expensive because it's these exotic salts. Most of the time, we'll use something like barite to weight up our drilling fluid, and those are solid particles, and there's only so many you can put into a liquid phase. But a lot of times when we think about, okay, how am I going to, what is the carrier fluid for all this barite I'm dumping in? I might not actually want to use fresh water if I'm trying to get really heavy. I might end up using one of these heavy exotic brines as my base to give me even that, that much more weight, depending on how heavy I'm trying to get. But I think from prior episodes, think about there's obviously huge cost ramifications for that. So trying to balance all that out can be a pretty big challenge.
Got it. So let's start off with the clear fluid base. How heavy can you get on that front?
Well, just a clear fluid, normally about 19.2 pounds per gallon, either through cesium formate or zinc bromide. If you want to use those as sort of your starting point, I mean that's pushing it, right? And in the past, we've talked about how a brine that's that, salty, if you will, it likes water that much, means it's going to be hard to keep that density because it's going to pull water from everything around it, the air, anything. All that being said, if you use that base fluid as sort of your starting point and added some weight material, that might be the way to go. However, zinc bromide is pretty corrosive and kind of nasty, and it's pretty difficult to viscosify. So when we try and narrow what is the heaviest possible thing I can do, I probably got to go cesium formate if I want to use a clear fluid as my base fluid. Whether, if I want to weight it up, if I want to viscosify it and add solid weight material, I have to suspend.
Right. And then this would be, and you kind of alluded to it, but this would be more for a completions application, correct?
If you're just going clear fluid, the only other time that I have seen a cesium formate, so reservoir drilling fluid, so open hole completions where you want to minimize the amount of solids, you use calcium carbonate just to seal the reservoir. And then the only other time I've seen a cesium formate based weighted fluid with solids in it was during the Macondo era. They were trying to come up with kill fluids as they were attempting to address that situation.
Really?
And so cesium, they were trying to find the absolute heaviest fluid they could come up with for that well. And I saw some formulations of cesium formate based and then weighted up from there.
Sheesh, that's heavy.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about weight material.
So, we all know barite, and I'll, describe some of that in a little bit more detail. But it may be we need something. So, our typical API barite could have a 4.1 specific gravity, 4.2. You can actually get higher than that. You get up to about 4.4 for barite. But if you want to get any heavier than that, you want a higher specific gravity, so higher density per unit volume of solid. Um, and so in some scenarios, you may actually use a blend. So, on US land, let's say we're in a bit of a bind, we need some more density. You might use a blend of hematite and barite. You won't just use barite on its own. You won't use hematite on its own. Hematite's pretty abrasive unless it's really fine grind. So you may want to limit how much you put in there. But all of that being said, many of these high density additives are a fine grind. They're precipitated. So instead of having the typical, D50 of 20 to, 20 microns or whatever you'd see in barite, they might have a D50 of 1 micron, 5 microns. So very fine grind material, which can help mitigate some of the sag issues and improve some flow properties. So those, certainly help, but finer particles will also limit abrasion.
Right. Okay. And so I'm trying to think. When it comes to weight material, is there any sort of difference when you're starting to mix? What should you be considering? Because when we talk about like just any like a 12-pound mud, mixing kind of comes like there's I guess a large margin of how you mix, but when it comes to like extremely heavy fluids, you want to be very mindful of how you mix this stuff because there could be some serious consequences if you mix it too fast or if you don't add enough of this to help hydrate the fluid or hydrate the solids. And so talk about mixing, because I think that's where a lot of times people who aren't familiar with really high density fluids can sort of fall on their face.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And think about the scenarios where we end up needing high density fluids, right? So sometimes it's, we know it's really heavy. We're planning on a high mud weight. Other times when you think about kill fluid, we're in a situation where we really need some density fast. And the hard part is the more solids you get into a fluid, the harder it is to get more solids to blend, which means, you might get up to 12 pounds using the normal, methodology, but then you have to start slowing down the heavy, once you get up 16, 17, 18 pounds,
Yep.
then it becomes a lot more dependent on mix procedure.
Yeah.
And then it becomes more and more dependent on mixed procedure. And so it takes a lot more time and a lot more patience to make sure that that weight material isn't just falling through and, piling up on the bottom of a pit when it's harder to agitate because it's thicker fluid. There's less water or base oil available because there's so much surface area and there's so many solid interactions. So you really have to slow down and, be intentional and methodical. And, the other hard part about this, jumping ahead to, transportation, is if you have a really heavy fluid, it's not like, are you going to mix it at a plant? That's probably where you'd like to do it. But imagine how many trucks, like you're not going to be able to fill these trucks, right? Like you're going to be limited out on weight that you can put on the road. And so like you're DOT limited if you're going to transport it that way. If you're offshore, you might not be able to pump that mud up from a boat. You might not have physically strong enough pumps to lift it up to the deck. Yeah. And so at that point, what you're going to end up having to do is mix it at the rig. It's very likely the hardest part of the mixing. Like you may send out 17 pound and then finish up weighting it up at the rig. And this is where you've got to do it using rig equipment and think about how much more slowly and methodically you're going to have to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. No, I on land, I think me personally being on a rig, I don't think I got above like a 14 or 14.5, and that would have been maybe for like a slug or something. But I remember working on a jackup and we had to mix like an 18.4. I don't know if it was kill mud or if it was for a slug or whatever, but it was using oil-based mud, and it was like when you got above like that 15, 16 pounds, it was like very much like add a little wet, add a little diesel, add a little barite, and it was like a very much like
Kind
we
of
had
a
time.
dance,
Yeah, and it was kind of because by the end of it, like you couldn't tell if it was being agitated or not because it was just so thick. So like you could tell there was like things move, like it was like moving, like almost like it was like breathing, but that you couldn't, like it wasn't agitating, and it was so heavy. And I got to think, I'm like, I forget the pounds per barrel that was, but then I was visualizing like how much of this 100 barrels is actually solids versus like free liquid. Yeah, and so it can be, you got to be really fine tuned with the mixing procedure. Kind of going back to that point, but yeah, transportation is again, it's a huge part of then you're really having to run numbers. It's like, okay, if we haul it to the rig using 50 trucks, is it better than doing it at the rig using, this much time and effort? And so it can become you really have to put some thought into it at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So we talked about transportation. Let's talk about the maintenance, because that again is a piece where you don't just want to let it sit, and with all those solids in there, you could do a lot of damage to the bottom of the, not damage, but you could accumulate a lot of solids where you don't want them.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing you have to think about. I mean, like you said with the agitators, like can your pump system on the rig, can it really handle this stuff? Like, are you gonna start seeing things fail? Are you gonna have agitators break because they haven't been strained that much for that long before? And then in the middle of all this, even circulating through gun lines and that kind of thing, you're gonna have friction. So the fluid's gonna warm up, which means it's gonna want to evaporate. And this goes for oil or
Yeah,
water-based.
good point.
Dehydration, if you're doing water-based mud, keep in mind almost every one of the weight materials that we use started as a paint pigment. And I mean, look, if you go all the way back, like way back when, the company was National Lead that started selling barite, and barite was a better alternative to lead-based paint. So anyways, you're grinding up these things as paint pigments. Well, what do we know? I mean, the whole point of paint is you paint it across the wall and then the solvent evaporates. And so, there are plenty of stories of trying to use very fine grind material and not being ready for it. And especially with evaporation or dehydration, having that stuff act like paint on thread connections and other things where you need a wash gun handy. You've got to wash out every pin in every box.
Yeah.
And if you don't, all of a sudden that stuff acts as kind of like a cement agent between connection, trying to break connections gets tough. This stuff can be sort of a nightmare, and you're also like, hey man, I need this stuff to be really heavy. And then you're trying to put water to it. You're like, wait, this just seems counterintuitive. So, I don't have a lot of hot tips. That's just tough. And I don't know that, thankfully we don't have to deal with this too often, but anybody I've ever talked to who's had to come up with sort of this balance has talked about how frustrating it can be.
Yeah.
So I think the maintenance part is where it's like, okay, kill mud is usually when you need this, and then you need a pumpable fluid. You don't have to worry about circulating as much, and thank goodness. But trying to maintain a system of like this can be, quite the challenge. And you need a lot of resources. You need to be prepared because stuff's going to break. The fluid is going to require a lot more attention than you're probably used to. And if you're running this kind of density, it's probably because of downhole pressures that require a lot of careful attention as well.
Yeah, no, that's true. And so I guess everyone's probably biting their nails waiting for the answer, Matt. So how heavy can you go?
I mean, it's one big, it depends, but I've done some math, and I've just looked at some other case histories. I've seen some viable barite laden formulations that are about 20.5 pounds per gallon.
Crazy. Think about a gallon of fluid and it weighing 20.5 pounds. Like, again, most of that being, like, if you were to look at it like on a, say, a diagram or a picture of a gallon of fluid, how much of that, just like off the top of your head, what percentage of that gallon is solids, roughly?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm just trying to
shot in the dark.
Like
more than half?
Yeah, probably. I mean, this stuff looks like paste.
Yeah.
Almost.
Crazy.
So going back to that like 35 pound per gallon thing I mentioned, it was just a jar sitting on a shelf, and I didn't know what it was, and I went and picked it, and it was, oh my gosh, like,
yeah, it's crazy.
It
like goes against like your natural because most things you can kind of gauge like how heavy something is, but when you
Yeah.
pick up something extra heavy like that, it just kind of like throws your mind off there for a minute. Okay, so on the barite side, 20.5 is
You know,
about
like
the max.
4.2 Bayrite, I think
Sure,
that's
that's a good
probably the
point.
neighborhood you'll land in. And
Okay.
you know, I would say I have seen formulations usually using some of these more exotic weight materials with things like manganese tetroxide and hematite and that kind of thing. They get closer to about 24 pounds per gallon. I think those once again would probably still be more like kill fluids than circulating fluids, but viable. Um, and so, yeah, you can get up there. I'm not saying these things don't cost a fortune, and they're not like you have to really want to drill with these things.
Right.
But from a like fluid properties perspective, they're viable. Um, and so I'd kind of leave it at that. And as that's about as absolute highest. If most people are like, look, if you can stay near 18 pounds or whatever, you're way less miserable. But anything above that is just a whole, astronomically more complex
Yeah.
drilling environment.
Right. And then I don't know. And then what about the say like clear brines or like sort of the exotic stuff? Did you mention how high you could go on that front?
That would be kind of the 35, right? So like that was a cesium formate base with with exotic weight material, and I can only imagine how much that stuff cost. But it was obviously a very important operation, and I think they were just trying to see anything and everything they could do from a viability perspective.
Yeah.
And that was kill mud. So
Well, I'd be curious if any of the listeners have gotten up around that range and where it was and what kind of well situation it was, because it'd be interesting to hear. I mean, again, on U.S. land where, we kind of live in this box of, call it 14-ish pounds or less drilling wise. And so, Matt, what's the heaviest fluid that you like have drilled with that you remember? Any?
I mean, probably in that 18-pound range.
No.
Um, it was interesting reading some reports from way back when I was in Azerbaijan. Like certain fields over there are so high pressure that they would talk about getting up to like 21 pounds per gallon to kill the well, and they would abandon it because they didn't have the BOPs. So that was the highest I think I saw like actually drilling with this, but it became kill fluid really fast.
Yeah.
And that was a long time ago, but you're hearing about, this Project 20K, these 20,000 PSI systems getting certified and approved. And, as the world continues to need more energy, we may be going after these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's interesting. And again, for anyone out there, if you're listening and you have a cool story regarding any fluids that you've used that are extremely high density, that maybe something we didn't even talk about. I mean,
Who knows what we're missing?
right. But at the end of the day, folks, please look us up. LinkedIn, we're active there. Connect with us, ask any questions, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at asfluids.com. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel. We're continuing to grow that and add content on there. The new website has been up for a while, but if you haven't checked it out, lots of resources on there to go educate and just learn more about AES. Matt, anything else? Am I forgetting something?
I think you got it all.
We got her, folks. Well, with that being said, be safe. And if you're drilling with heavy fluids, again, lots to consider. So be safe out there. Until next time, folks. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of The Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.